Today we are going to examine the philosophy of God, and as you can see, we decided to film out in the sunset so that way you can see my sexy, fresh-shaved face in all of its glory. So, what is God? Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask a fundamentalist of the Abrahamic tradition such as Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, they will tell you that God is a literal being that is watching your every move. And if you ask a New Age hippie, they will tell you that it's the life force, man. What about somebody who's recently taken a psychedelic? They'll say, well, I'm God. We're all God. It's absolutely infinite.
Oh my God. It's infinite. It's infinite.
If you ask a Buddhist, they will tell you that God is the observer of all things. If you ask a Hindu, they will tell you that it is the Atman, the self, with a capital S. Or if they're clever, they might ask, which one? Of course, there are also pagan gods and goddesses from Greek and Norse mythology as well, and every other tradition stretching back thousands of years. If you ask an atheist what God is, they will tell you that it's simply a fiction of the human imagination. We have evolved from primitive, superstitious models of reality to a more materialistic model. Why sit in church listening to some old dude in a robe when I can cruise around in a sports car with a hot babe next to me, blasting Def Leppard? And yes, I am painfully aware that it's no longer the 80s, unfortunately. I won't try to use my past life nostalgia boner as evidence for reincarnation. Getting back on topic, in today's video we will be examining Aldous Huxley's God in the World from his Perennial Philosophy, as well as a few other texts and resources to examine the philosophy of the divine. Quote, there is a way to reality in and through the soul, and there is a way to reality in and through the world. Either the ultimate goal can be reached by following either of these ways to the exclusion of the other is to be doubted. The third and best and hardest way is that which leads to the divine ground, simultaneously in that the perceiver and that which is perceived. The mind is no other than the Buddha, and Buddha is no other than sentient being. When mind assumes the form of a sentient being, it has suffered no decrease. When it has become a Buddha, it has added nothing to itself. Huang Po. All creatures have existed externally in the divine essence, as in their exemplar. So far as they conform to the divine idea, all beings were, before their creation, one with the essence of God. God creates into time what was and is in eternity. Eternally, all creatures are God, insofar as that they are in God. They are the same life, the same essence, the same power, the same one and nothing less. The image of God is found essentially and personally in all mankind. Each possesses it whole, entire and undivided, and altogether not more than one alone. In this way we are all one, intimately united in our eternal image, which is the image of God and the source in us in all of life. Our created essence and our life are attached to it without mediation as to their eternal cause. So if we're to examine the perennial philosophy at its core, it is that the mystics of every religious tradition, when looking inward, have found that God is in all things. And this isn't to say that all religions have the same exact worldview, but that experience of the divine can be experienced, perhaps expressed in different ways. In the East, it is referred to enlightenment or Buddhahood, to be more precise. In the West, as Christ consciousness and self-realization. The term non-duality is used from the Western perspective to make sense of Eastern insights. Non-dual states of consciousness can be described as seeing through the separation of things, good and evil, light and dark, east and west, quiet and loud. Huxley goes on to quote from Christian mystics who essentially express non-dual insights. God, who in his simple substance is everywhere equally, nevertheless in efficacy, is in rational creatures in another way than in irrational, and in good rational creatures in another way than in the bad. He is in the rational creatures in such a way as to not be comprehended by them. By all the rational ones, however, he can be comprehended through knowledge, but only by the good is he to be comprehended, also through love. St. Bernard. When a man is in mere understanding, I answer, when a man sees one thing separated from another, and when is a man above mere understanding? That I can tell you. When a man sees all in all, then a man stands beyond mere understanding. Eckhart. Now, seeing everything contained in all things sounds great, very poetic language, but God being in all things, where's the proof? I can't see gods or goddesses as a rational, scientifically minded person. We can't definitively rule out their existence in this vast cosmos, but currently as humans in the 21st century on the planet Earth, there is no evidence for the divine. Where do I find this evidence of non-dual states of consciousness? Maybe Prabhupada, spiritual teacher of none other than the science of self-realization, will have some thoughts on this. Quote, "In search of the original cause of everything, the cause of all causes, modern scientists have delved deeply into the atom and found electrons, protons, and many other particles. But they have failed to find the ultimate subatomic particle, the supersoul, an expansion of Lord Krishna, because they know nothing of the spiritual science of Bhakti Yoga. By entering into every atom and into the heart of every living being, the supersoul pervades, sustains, and controls the entire material creation. From the supersoul comes all knowledge, remembrance, and even consciousness itself. But because the atheistic scientists can never receive his mercy, they cannot perceive him, and thus for them, mystery of creation will remain unsolved." Ken Wilber, known for integral philosophy, also has an interesting take on this. He argues that in regard to quantum mechanics, when you use equations to predict the behavior of electrons, it doesn't necessarily prove or disprove the insights of the Buddha, for instance. I myself am a college dropout and lost interest in math in high school. So he's much more of an authority on this.
I thought you'd enjoy clarifying this one.
Okay.
The quantum level, is that where the manifest and unmanifest realities meet?
Categorically not. I don't know more confusion in the last 30 years than has come from quantum physics. It just is a nightmare. So let me try and back up and weave a few things in with that and see if I can help clarify some of this. And I promise you this is endlessly confusing because so many people have so many just flat-out wrong notions and then confused notions. And incidentally, I did all of my graduate work in biophysics, quantum physics, and biochemistry. So this is something I know professionally.
Right.
And I can guarantee you that the Schrödinger quantum wave equation has absolutely nothing to do with these kinds of spiritual realities, except insofar as everything is a manifestation of spirit. But let me try to explain where the confusion has come from and why people actually think the quantum level has something to do with unmanifest mind. And by people, I don't mean ordinary people. You find these misconceptions in Deepak Chopra's and people like Friedrich Capra very much good-heartedly want to take something like modern quantum physics and give some proof for mysticism, and it just doesn't work. And let me start by saying that the modern quantum revolution that everybody talks about took place in 1905 when Max Planck introduced the notion of quanta. Most of the revolutionary things that were introduced, including the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, all of those happened by 1925. The collapse of the Schrödinger wave packet, which is what people refer to by the quantum level and the quantum wave packet collapsing, all of that was figured out by 1925. So this leading-edge massive breakthrough in modern physics is about a century old. Well, that's number one. Number two, here's why what's happening at a quantum level so led itself to a mystical misinterpretation, including right up to the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? And about 20 years ago, the confusions were so deep that I did a book called Quantum Questions. And I went back and took the 13 pioneering founders of modern quantum physics, including Bohr and Heisenberg and de Broglie and Schrödinger and Eddington. And I took all of their writings, including Einstein's, everything that they had written on mysticism, and edited them to put all of their writings into that book. So you can find all of their original writings on physics and mysticism. And as I point out in the introduction, not one of those 13 individuals, not one, felt that quantum mechanics had anything to do with spiritual realities or mysticism. Not one. And yet, all of them were mystics.
Right.
And they were mystics not because of physics, but despite it. And the actual failures of quantum mechanics to account for anything spiritual basically was the last straw that broke the camel's back and helped all of them become mystics in the sense of metaphysics.
Perhaps we could consider this as a possibility. What if our model of God that we were raised with in the West could have been useful in the past, but is outdated? In the words of Francis of Assisi, the one you are looking for is the one who is looking. And not to use a God of the gaps argument, but consciousness is still relatively poorly understood by science. I might shoot a future commentary video about consciousness if there's a request, though it's a very dense and tough subject that I would have to do a lot of research and preparation for. I again quote from Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. Every individual being from the atom up to the most highly organized of living bodies and the most exalted of finite minds may be thought of, in René Gounod's phrase, as a point where a ray of the primordial Godhead meets one of the differentiated creaturely emanations of that same Godhead's creative energy. The creature as a creature may be very far from God, in the sense that it lacks the intelligence to discover the nature of the divine ground of being. But the creature in its eternal essence, as the meeting place of creatureliness and primordial Godhead, is one of the infinite number of points where divine reality is wholly and eternally present. So from this view, God is not separate from its creation, but has positioned itself and immersed itself into every aspect of the creation. I suppose as a metaphor, we could imagine a painter that has positioned himself in the painting, but also that of the canvas and every shade of paint, and the brush as well. A concern from secular humanists, and understandably so, could go along the lines of, well, what kind of God would allow so much suffering in the world? And this is based on the Judeo-Christian assumption that we were brought up with, that God is a separate entity in the kingdom of heaven, sipping on a cocktail surrounded by beautiful women while the rest of us attack each other during a pandemic. So, but what if God is the universe in every possible manifestation? This would mean that God is Donald Trump, God is law enforcement, God is the protester, God is the virus, God is the good person, and God is the shitty person. God is what's looking at this video right now. We go on to the Perennial Philosophy. The thing known as the independent of the mode of nature and the knower, what the poet and painters see and try to record for us, is actually there, waiting to be apprehended by anyone who has the right kind of faculties. Similarly, in the image of the sacramental object, the divine ground is wholly present. Faith and devotion prepare the worshipper's mind for perceiving the array of Godhead at its point of intersection with the particular fragment of matter before him. Incidentally, by being worshipped, such symbols become the centers of a field of force, the longings, emotions, and imaginations of those who kneel, and for generations have knelt before the shrine, create, as it were, enduring vortex in the psychic medium, so that the image lives with a secondary, inferior divine life projected onto it by its worshippers, as well as with the primary divine life, which, in common with all other animate and inanimate beings, possesses, in virtue of its relation to the divine ground. The religious experience of sacramentality and image worshippers may be perfectly genuine and objective, but it is not always or necessarily an experience of God or the Godhead. It may be, perhaps in most cases it actually is, an experience of the field of force generated by the minds of past and present worshippers and projected onto the sacramental object where it sticks. So to speak, in condition what may be called second-hand objectivity, waiting to be perceived by minds subtly, suitably attuned to it. This brings us to our distinction between the esoteric and exoteric forms of spirituality. The exoteric form is what most of mainstream religion and culture is. Practices such as going to church, dogma, traditions, may or may not still have use, and the funny outfits, of course. But the esoteric aspects of a religion is where mysticism takes place. A symbol or statue can be created to represent the original insight a mystic once had. But over time, this original vision becomes calcified and dogmatic, and so religious tradition takes its place. Quote, "The all-too Protestant satirist forgot that God is in the hog trough no less than in the conventionally sacred image. Lift the stone and you will find me, affirms the best known of the loggia of Jesus. Cleave the wood and I am there. Those who have personally and immediately realized the truth of this saying, and, along with it, the truth of Brahmanism's, that art thou, are wholly delivered." It is in the Indian and Far Eastern formulations of the Perennial Philosophy that this subject is most systematically treated. What is prescribed is a process of conscious discrimination between the personal self and the self that is identical with Brahman, between the individual ego and the Buddha womb or universal mind. The result of this discrimination is a more or less sudden and complete revulsion of consciousness, and the realization of state of no mind, which may be described as freedom from perceptual and intellectual attachment to the ego principle. This state of no mind exists, as it were, on a knife edge between the carelessness of the average sensual man and the strained over-eagerness of the zealot for salvation. To achieve it, one must walk delicately and maintain it, must learn to combine the most intense alertness of tranquil and self-denying passivity, the most indomitable determination with a perfect submission to the leadings of the spirit. When no mind is sought after by a mind, says Huang Po, that is making a particular object of thought. There is only testimony of silence. It goes beyond thinking. In other words, we as separate individuals must not try to think it, but rather to permit ourselves to be thought by it. Similarly, in the Diamond Sutra, we read of that if a bodhisattva, in his attempt to realize suchness, retains the thought of an ego, a person, a separate being, or a soul, he is no longer a bodhisattva. Now, this is extremely subtle and can get very messy very quickly. So let's say you're down for this and you're like, I want to get enlightened. I have all these cravings for sex and money and power, and I just want to shave my head and be a monk. Perhaps this could be useful in order to take a break from this neurotic society. Or perhaps you take up meditation and you have a Satori experience and your perceptions are wiped clean for a bit. This can really be incredible. But then you're attached to this state and you want to go back and back. So this is based on the assumption that you are not enlightened in your day-to-day existence. This is good, this is bad, this is a low state of consciousness, this is a high state of consciousness, etc. And non-duality is all-inclusive. I guess that would make reality, this reality the ultimate not-so-safe space. I again quote from Prabhupada, and he describes how unlimited the Hindu god Krishna is. Krishna is a name for God, which means all attractive. Unless one is all attractive, he cannot be God. So Krishna consciousness means God consciousness. All of us are small particles of God, equal in quality with him. Our position as living entities is like that of a small particle of gold in relation to a large quantity of gold. If God is unlimited, he can expand himself in unlimited forms. Otherwise, there is no meaning to the word unlimited. God is omnipotent. He can maintain not only 16,000 wives, but 16 million, but still encounter no difficulty. Otherwise, there is no meaning to the word omnipotent. We return to the Perennial Philosophy. Before going on to discuss the means whereby it is possible to come to the fullness as well as the height of spiritual knowledge, let us briefly consider the experience of those who have been privileged to behold the One in all things, but have made no efforts to perceive it within themselves. A great deal of interesting material on this subject may be found in Buck's Cosmic Consciousness. All that need be said here is that such cosmic consciousness may come unsought, and is in the nature of what Catholic theologians call a gratuitous grace. One may have a gratuitous grace, the power of healing, for example, or foreknowledge, while in a state of mortal sin, and the gift is neither necessary to nor sufficient for salvation. At the best, such accessions of cosmic consciousness are described by Buck are merely unusual invitations to further personal effort in the direction of the inner height as well as the external fullness of knowledge. That nirvana and samsara are one is a fact about the nature of the universe, but it is a fact which cannot be fully realized or directly experienced except by souls far advanced in spirituality. For ordinary, nice, unregenerate people to accept this truth by hearsay and to act upon it in practice is merely to court disaster. Well, Huxley pretty much sums up all 6 episodes of Wild Wild Country in a nutshell. We end with one last excerpt from Perennial Philosophy in which he quotes from Thomas Traherne. The world is a mirror of inner beauty, yet no man sees it. It is a temple of majesty, yet no man regards it. It is a region of light and peace. Did not men disquiet it? It is the paradise of God. It is more to man since he has fallen than it was before. It is the place of angels and the gate of heaven. When Jacob woke out of his dream, he said, God is here, and I wish it not. How dreadful is this place! This is none other than the house of God and the gate of heaven. So that wraps up today's episode. This is one of the final commentaries on Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. I'll probably be doing this one and That Art Thou. There's a few other chapters. I think Self-Knowledge was another one that I might be interested in the future, but I'll just be doing this one and another one. And that'll wrap it up for a little while. I have pretty much all of the projects for Focus Shift already in queue and planned for the rest of the year, and I'm really excited for a lot of the new developments. So you can follow us on all of the usual platforms, Facebook, oh wait, fuck you,
Thou shall not be named.
Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, all that kinds of stuff. So yeah, hope you're gonna have a glorious week, and I will touch base with you in the comments, and if you shoot me a DM. Peace.
Send it.